And thank you very much to the organizers for having us here today. Thank you for your attention, and do hope that our brief session will provide some insights that are of interest to you. Cities, as you've been hearing through this event, are definitely at the center of climate risk. These issues that are coming at us are not of just a national level or a local level, they're of a global significance. According to C40 cities, 70% of cities are already being impacted by climate change. The economic cost of rising sea levels and flooding alone is expected to be more than US $1 trillion by 2050, with over 90% of cities located near coastal areas expected to feel the impacts from flooding. These are substantial potential changes down the road. I mean, as evidence of some of this increasing impact, more than 490 local governments in Canada have recently declared a climate emergency. The Federation of Canadian Municipalities estimates that to avoid the worst impacts of climate change at the municipal level, an annual investment of $5.3 billion per year will be required starting immediately. On a more positive note, FCM, of course, also estimates that for every $1 billion invested into disaster and climate change mitigation efforts, $6 billion in costs can be avoided in the future. Disclosure plays a critical role in this. Disclosure can actually absolutely lead to better decision-making and can lead to behavioral changes. In the EU, there's some major strides that are happening around advancing climate-related financial disclosures, and at the global level, there's a lot of activity, and Canada needs to keep pace. Climate change can have devastating effects on our assets. The impact on municipal infrastructure and assets vital to the provision of services can be debilitating, and the impact on our financial statements and public sector sustainability can grow significantly if not managed. Important to note how this can change how we operate and change the way we make decisions in organizations. So this brings us to something some of you may have heard about, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. This is an issue that has been evolving for a number of years. In fact, released in December 2015, the Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, as you'll hear me say TCFD, the recommendations provides an important resource and framework that local governments in Canada can use to better prepare for climate change impacts and build more resilient cities. Disclosure can lead to a lot of this. The TCFD framework and its recommendations are supported by G20 countries with growing support across Canada, including from the expert panel on sustainable finance. While the TCFD was established as a voluntary initiative related to publicly traded companies' disclosures, it's gaining interest from a wide range of industries and sectors, as well as organizations of all sizes and structures. And the public sector and local governments can also very much be relevant in the context of TCFD. It's about transparency. The key objectives behind the TCFD recommendations are for clear, consistent, and reliable financial information used for decision-making. And it's important to note that these disclosures draw on existing climate change reporting frameworks. So organizations are not asked to reinvent the wheel, but to consolidate and leverage information they may already be disclosing to non-financial users, applying a harmonized and transparent reporting approach. Looking at the TCFD recommendations specifically, we could spend an entire session on this alone. So I'm going to only give you a real touch of it. And this slide largely covers the core of what it's about. These four areas around governance, strategy, risk management, and the metrics and targets are really critical in the context of disclosure. At the governance level is the disclosure related to the organization's structure for managing the climate-related risks and opportunities, how senior decision makers oversee and integrate these risks and opportunities into the decision-making process, and how management effectively oversees these areas. On the strategy front, the importance of identifying and evaluating climate-related risks and opportunities, not only in the short term and medium term, but also into the longer term. On the risk management side, it's important to note that this relates to really the identification of the processes for identifying, assessing, and managing the potential material climate-related risks. And this applies to both the physical risks, issues of hurricane, flood, sea level rising, and also transitional risks that deal with government policy changes, legal requirements, technological advancements, market shifts, and even reputational risks that can occur in the context of this. Within the TCFD recommendations, it goes even a little further to suggest the potential for integrating this into the organization's enterprise risk management process. And of course, throughout all of this, being the accountant in the room, the metrics and targets are always important, critical to be disclosing those key metrics related to demonstrating the process for how the organization is progressing and how they're looking towards achieving their targets and goals in this space. One of the new elements, which is very interesting, is the scenario analysis side of it. And scenario analysis is really critical in terms of looking at and disclosing the resilience of the strategy of the organization and taking into consideration a variety of scenarios in the process. And it very much does come down to then the disclosure itself being, the financial disclosures being material, because information in climate-related financial disclosures can be a critical source of information to support the decisions within municipal governments, including capital investment decisions. One can imagine that a city that is seen to be coping well with the looming threat of climate risks would be a better place to either stay invested or become invested. And this translates directly into attracting employment, attracting people to the city, and broader financial prosperity. When we look at disclosure in that context, you think about the ways the TCFD is helping in this. I mean, it's in the nature and the extent of disclosure and how it has really varied quite significantly in the past with insufficient context, often inconsistent terminology, and this was true across various sectors and various industries. The TCFD creates a coherent and standardized framework, and it's relevant for both the private and public sectors. It builds on existing climate disclosures like the CDP or the Carbon Disclosure Project that are already being used by investors of municipal debentures. The TCFD is intended to start a dialogue about climate risk and opportunities and the impacts that it's going to have on the organization's risk profile. I think important to note at this point is also that the TCFD really takes that conversation beyond environmental sustainability. It considers current processes and practices, such as the allocation of capital budget dollars, the capital project approval process, the useful life of assets, services provided, and even resources required. This disclosure facilitates a shift towards sustainable and resilient operations. It encourages an integrated approach to decision making and considers the opportunities and risks posed by societal issues. So in February of 2020, with funding from Natural Resources Canada and the support from the Delphi Group, CPA Canada released our guidance for cities to help evaluate and implement recommendations of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. And we were very fortunate because, of course, the development of this wouldn't have been successful without the absolutely tremendous support of a working group and various stakeholders. Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal are all leading the way in a lot of these disclosure conversations and were key and played a critical role in the development of the guidance. Both the sustainability and finance departments from all three cities were engaged as part of the working group process. And that's an important partnership that can, again, I think maybe Sandra will allude to that a little bit in her presentation. Involving the finance as well as the sustainability element of the organization has proven to be a very important piece of the puzzle. In addition, consideration was given to ensure the perspectives from cities of all sizes across Canada were incorporated and included by having ICLEI Canada, the Canadian Urban Sustainability Practitioners Network, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities represented on the group, as well as an international perspective through the C4 cities. The three primary objectives of the guidance are really around enhancing the usefulness of the city's external reports, the financial reports that are going to be utilized, demonstrating that climate-related financial disclosures are core, helping cities determine what climate-related information is valuable for internal decision-making and short-term budgeting and longer-term capital planning. And then providing a general process framework for aligning a city's internal and external reporting with TCF recommendations. And this is important for all municipalities to partner, especially the smaller municipalities that just may not have the same resources or means to do it on their own. Within the report, you'll see there's a variety of elements that are potentially providing insights that you will find useful from the experiences of Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. And this isn't the only resource available. As you embark on your disclosure journey, and I will say it's a journey, all the cities we've spoken to, and I've spoken with CFOs across the country, you won't get it perfect. You won't get it all right to begin with. It's an important point, though, is to start and use the resources that are available. You don't have to start from scratch. You can build on what's available. In addition to the guide that you will find on our website, free of charge, available to anybody, we've also developed a tool to help assess how climate-related issues may affect the financial statements of cities. Climate-related risks and events will have implications for cash flows, assets, liabilities, and revenue streams. Accountants are an important part in this discussion. Climate change can have a material impact on our financial reporting of both health and performance in public sector organizations. At the global level, interesting to note, there's actually positive movement happening as we speak toward the establishment of a global sustainability reporting standards board, which will no doubt have a substantial focus on climate-related financial disclosures. More and more resources are emerging, and we've provided links to a number of them here. It's an important thing for all partners to look at, and partner where you can. Build communities of interest and work together, because this is something that we all need to pay attention to. And I think working together gets us further ahead much more quickly. The TCFD disclosures, as I said, are a journey. It's an important opportunity to disclose the material essential points that have the greatest impact on our asset management risks and opportunities. And now I think probably an important element of the presentation is to actually hear the experience within the City of Toronto. And so I'll pass it now over to Sandra. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you, Gord. Just before you go on, Sandra, do you have a presenter mode?
You know what? Maybe I do. Let me just stop sharing.
And Malik, if you're able to provide assistance, that would be helpful.
Sure. Sure, we did practice this.
We did, yes. Let me just...
there's always a little bit of a bump along the way, right, Malik?
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Just in the meantime, for folks, there's been a lot of resources that I put in the chat box, but we've gotten a few questions as to whether or not those resources can be amalgamated into sort of one big master document, not just for part one, but for part two, but we will endeavor to get that to folks.
That's great.
Does this work better?
That's better. Oh,
okay.
There we are.
I should
have, my apologies, I should have stopped up front and asked. That's great. Thanks, Sandra.
No. And I should have taken notes when we practiced. So anyways, hello, everyone. And thanks, Gord, so much for that introduction. So I'm just going to take you through some of the more details with respect to TCFD and the work that we've been doing both in Toronto as well as with Vancouver and Montreal. I just wanted to start with just high level in terms of the infrastructure landscape in Canada. So the 2019 Canadian Infrastructure Report Card is a useful snapshot of the state of the Canadian infrastructure. In Ontario, we know that the Financial Accountability Office has done some work with the provincial infrastructure, but what we don't have is a really good snapshot of the state of the municipal infrastructure in municipalities. And as a result, we know that data is good decision support or data for good decision support is a key issue. So a concern that may emerge is the lack of asset management data, including the lack of financial data, such as replacement value and the planned investment and expenditure levels for each asset portfolio. So even though there are some high number estimates, even within the City of Toronto, we're still working through what the big picture really looks like. What you can see on this particular graph is that a lot of the infrastructure in Canada is not in good condition. The report highlights that the majority of the infrastructure in Canada is more than 20 years old. And it emphasizes the need for both reinvestment in existing infrastructure along with construction of new assets. When infrastructure is old and in poor condition, we all know that it's more susceptible to climate weather events. So from a municipal infrastructure perspective, what's common in Canada with municipalities is that many of our operations are critical to our populations served. Many of our services must remain operational even during extreme weather events, such as an ice storm or extended power disruption. In fact, many functions are more essential than services provided by the private sector. Think of roads, public transit, water treatment, and storm systems, which form part of the municipal infrastructure landscape. So if you look at the middle icon, if this slide were an ad for a restaurant, it would actually have quite a few dollar signs representing the value of the municipal infrastructure and many more if we think about the value of the Canadian government infrastructure overall. In Toronto alone, the latest estimate that we have for replacement cost is exceeding $95 billion. As a result, there is a need to know the cost of impacts of extreme weather on interdependent infrastructure systems. But there can also be opportunities for cost savings and service enhancements that public sector organizations can tap into only if they have the right information. So what TCFD does is it allows infrastructure managers, decision makers within municipal environments to perform the due diligence required to ensure that infrastructure is available to provide the services municipalities are responsible for, and the financial reporting cost is managed. So when it comes to the relevance, Gord actually provided you some information as part of his section of the presentation. But what we've been doing with Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal is really thinking about what our municipal role is. Municipalities serve the public, communities, and the public interest. Our work is essential for the well-being of the public. The organizations that we work for are not just accountable to committees, councils, boards, and even investors. It's important to keep in mind that we provide services to large groups within differing demographics and vulnerabilities. Our organizations promote economic prosperity and quality of life. In order to maintain public trust and confidence, it's imperative that municipalities use taxpayers' dollars wisely and focus on demonstrating stewardship and accountability of financial resources. In Canada, municipalities are starting to recognize the importance of developing and implementing resilient strategies that will allow them to survive, adapt, and thrive in the face of any challenge, particularly climate change. The reason for this emphasis is that climate change risk and resilience can impact operations in a number of ways. The infrastructure and programs that many municipalities result in greenhouse gas emissions. So material climate risks can impact asset and service delivery costs and even the ability to operate at all. So it's clear that there is a resulting need for succinct financial disclosures on material climate-related risks, impacts, and opportunities in order to make well-informed decisions. And TCFD reporting for climate-related impacts is valuable because of the importance of consistent and comparable information for decision makers to better understand and manage climate-related risks and, of course, the climate-related opportunities. So when we have a consistent understanding of climate costs and risks, that will help municipalities when they seek guidance and support from provincial and federal governments, as well as partnership opportunities with the private sector. Transparent disclosure mitigates under or overreaction to costs and the associated impact. In particular, TCFD highlights vulnerabilities in capital investment strategies and asset management plans, which are becoming increasingly important as a result of provincial requirements, and we all know the recovering efforts following COVID. So with TCFD reporting in the municipal space, even though it's not required, it's actually a leadership opportunity to provide readers of the annual financial report with clear disclosure following a consistent framework on how the issue of climate is being managed within municipalities and the work that we do for our residents, businesses, and visitors. We have an opportunity to identify applicable risks and explain how materiality of these risks is being determined and managed. We also have material opportunities that are available, the cost, associated savings or cost reductions, and positive impact that's created. And as Gord said, we can support better informed capital allocations and financial decisions that will help smooth the transition to a low carbon economy and infrastructure systems that are more resilient to extreme weather events. So really, we're talking about future-oriented disclosures, allowing internal and external users of our financial information to consider the impact of climate change on the durability of assets and prioritizing investments using a risk-based approach that considers climate. What we've also found is with greater climate risk transparency and progress on green initiatives, it may actually result in lower investment costs, which translate to greater benefits for taxpayers. So think about sustainable finance and the opportunities that climate disclosures bring to broadening sustainable finance that will come at a lower financing cost. So you can imagine the opportunity available to drive positive change for residents and businesses in our communities, securing long-term resilience against climate change. It essentially accelerates action. So I just wanted to cover just a few things on the financial cost, and Gord alluded to these things in his discussion. So climate change increases the risk of extreme weather events. We know that. Power outages, heat waves, and flooding. These risks are obvious physical risks, which can have significant impact on infrastructure costs and management. Think about more frequent repairs and maintenance, decreases in useful life, which means higher depreciation numbers, or significant asset impairment, which means a write-down in value or reduced service capacity, which can reduce revenues that cities rely on to provide services. Add to that increased insurance costs, if you can get insurance at all, and increased exposure to litigation, which would be the potential liability associated with emitting greenhouse gases. Think about the increasing support that's required by vulnerable communities, in fact, all residents who rely on transit, clean water, and usable roads. And then there's also the transition risks that need to be considered as we move to low carbon economies, which could materially increase municipal costs as a result of society's response to climate change. Asset values can be impacted by these costs. So putting a cost to climate change is key. In fact, a consistent approach to costing climate change is beneficial for comparability across all municipalities. There is a cost to managing and mitigating the risks of climate change, but that can be quickly overshadowed by the cost of doing nothing at all and having to catch up later. So we believe that it's a basic function of municipalities to be aware and be prepared to handle major risks such as climate change, and bringing this discussion into more consistent financial terms as offered by the guidelines of TCFD. So when we identify risks and costing the impact that can move us towards sound financial management principles and actual action to reducing emissions and mitigating risks. Now think about the opportunities, because there actually are opportunities that go beyond emissions reductions. We have resource productivity improvements through efficiencies that can result in overall cost reductions. Demand for action can bring innovation, resulting in the ability to provide services in a better way, including reducing carbon intensity. And there's always the new sources of funding to support the development of new assets that emit fewer greenhouse gases. All of these opportunities protect the assets that we rely on for services and can contribute to lower costs or sustainable revenue sources. As an example, if you consider the disclosures that Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal have made to date, implementing TCFD is an opportunity to consolidate and leverage information that may already be disclosed to non-financial users, but applying a harmonized and transparent reporting approach. As we start on our journey, and we are going to emphasize this is a journey with a focus on material qualitative disclosure, we are working towards common methodologies to be able to provide material quantitative disclosures. The future cost of climate change if we act in a business as usual manner, and the impact that that can have on the financial health as well as financial performance of our organizations. We in Vancouver and Toronto and Montreal agree that we need a methodology for estimating future costs of climate damage to major types of municipal infrastructure by understanding the cost of doing nothing versus the opportunities if we do something will significantly impact how we manage our capital investments in the future. So disclosure of climate risk management initiatives following the TCFD framework offers decision makers an opportunity to see how municipalities have embraced action to manage the impacts of climate change. Sustainable finance has an important role in efforts to meet net zero emissions by 2050, which is why public support of TCFD needs to be considered. So as we move towards TCFD disclosures, there's actually many positive implications for municipalities. One is the obvious partnership that's been discussed a number of times between accountants and operational and sustainability staff to better understand the situation, beginning with qualitative analysis and building, again, that journey towards quantitative analysis with strong financial analytics that consider the cost of doing something versus the cost of doing nothing. Municipalities have the opportunity to increase sharing of best practices in the climate change and sustainable finance space through community of practice initiatives, municipal leadership exchange opportunities that include organizations like CPA Canada are needed to encourage continuing disclosures about sustainable finance and alignment of disclosure frameworks such as TCFD and CDP. So there is an opportunity to work together to reduce duplication of effort while promoting understanding of green bonds, carbon pricing, and standardized approaches to costing climate change and the impact on infrastructure. So I am going to emphasize the opportunity to work together to develop cost methodologies for likely damage to infrastructure caused by future climate scenario analysis. And there is the need for cost estimates for adapting the infrastructure. The work that Toronto is doing with Vancouver and Montreal to establish a consistent means of identifying future anticipated costs associated with climate change is an essential way to communicate to decision makers that action is needed to reduce financial or unacceptable impacts. So these multidisciplinary teams can work in partnership to provide training in order to increase those operational benefits as well. So as an example, BC has been working diligently on developing training for all aspects of its building related workforce. Partnerships amongst municipalities are a tremendous opportunity to share ideas, knowledge, and experiences. So not only has TCFD furthered our discussions with our municipal partners, but we've also had the opportunity to collaborate with other stakeholders, including our external auditors, to determine how we can improve the benchmarking capabilities of TCFD. So what does this do in terms of trust and confidence? Well, confidence in government is an essential part of democracy. What we see at stake is being able to portray accurately that climate risks are understood and being managed appropriately. This work can contribute to the continued prosperity of municipalities in helping to attract and retain investment in our city. It goes beyond investment in multiple green bonds. What is most significant is attracting and retaining investment that results in employment and economic prosperity. So our roadmap, it is truly a journey. We recognize that larger municipalities have more and different staff resources to undertake this kind of work. That's why partnerships and collaborations are so important, because even with the size of Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, we are actually finding it with all of the other priorities, finding it, let's say, a challenge that we're working through to make sure that we have the right number of the right people and the right numbers of people to support this work. Increasing progress, such as reporting greenhouse gas emissions and reduction progress to date, and qualitative information on financial risks in non-financial reports, that's a great start. Moving material, high-quality information into the annual financial report tells the readers of our financial information that we're taking climate risks and opportunities seriously. And then working with our auditors and CPA Canada to develop standards and methods to provide assurance. And our ultimate goal is to actually getting these disclosures into our financial statements. That is our ultimate desired state. So where do you start? Start by familiarizing yourself with the 11 TCFD recommendations. Train your environmental, sustainability, and accounting professionals together as an opportunity to elevate the social issue of climate change and the material implications that can arise. The CPA Canada Maturity Assessment Guidance document can be used to establish multi-year roadmaps to identify gaps and benchmark progress to full disclosures and associated action plans. Identify your climate-related risks and opportunities. Think about your assets and the impact that doing nothing can have on costs, asset life, and future service capacity. TCFD will help you identify what that will do to your financial health and financial performance. Develop action plans where there are gaps, and disclose your material findings and opportunities that you have available. Start small, but start. That's it. Thanks very much.